Welcome to the new dystopian world of web video carnage. Okay, well, not really. This is Hacking TV.
And for a fact, the new realities of Washington have inaugurated a new era of public fact-checking.
Then Netflix continues its race toward world domination.
All that, and Nancy Grace plans to dominate something. I'm Saul Hansell.
And I'm Steve Rosenbaum, and this is Hacking TV. Welcome, everybody. We got plenty to cover today. Let's just dive right in, shall we?
So in years past, things were different. We can say that, and we will continue to say that. People didn't tend to fact check inaugural addresses. You know, ask not what you can do for your country, or what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country is not a fact checkable statement or fear itself. But somehow every journalist in town was armed and ready and, awarding Pinocchios right and left to the, dark vision of our next 4 years presented by a fearless leader.
Well, let's put this in some context. During the entire primary season, there was this subtext, which was maybe he's really just kidding and he'll be different if he gets the nomination. Then he got the nomination and he was like, yeah, no, I'm pretty much the same guy. And everyone was like, well, maybe he'll be different if he gets elected. Then he got elected, and the inauguration, it turns out he really doesn't get along with anybody, doesn't really like anybody, and talked about the world we live in terms that were like, you just scratch your head going, carnage. Like, I'm sorry, the carnage stops now. I live in New York. New York is, it has its issues, no doubt. And there's issues with people, homelessness and poverty, but it is, for all measures, a more livable, more safe, more equitable city than it was 10 years ago. And then I'll be done with my little rant in just a second. We have this very strange morning between Kellyanne Conway and Sean Spicer, essentially blaming the media for misrepresenting the data about the inaugural numbers, when the photographs kind of make it a non-issue. Like, there were just way more people in 2009 than there were this year. Crowd checking is always hard, right? The organizations always want to overestimate the numbers. The officials always want to underestimate the numbers. There's always a drama about how many people showed up. But that big chunk of white dirt in the middle of the National Mall is not a debatable fact.
So what's interesting here is that the Trump administration comes out guns blazing, and they're picking something that is trivial, that symbolically just reinforces the narcissism of the commander-in-chief, and is loosely verifiable. So they're basically announcing that they are just going to assert newspeak and say any attempt to compare what the administration says to verifiable facts are the press trying to delegitimize the president.
Right. I believe, as Kellyanne Conway said, there are alternative facts.
Yes, there are. And they are apparently what is running the government right now. All
right, so let's talk about, there's a lot of fact checking to talk about. So let's start with what Storyful is doing, because that's super.
So the good news here is that there is a long, there's a lot of work that's been done to combat different kinds of lies, right? So Storyful really emerged out of the idea that when stuff shows up sort of from, quote, citizen journalists on YouTube and Instagram and so on, you want to know, is that really what it's supposed to be, right? Is that demonstration really in Tahrir Square, or is that taken from some Bollywood movie? And so Storyful has 2 or 3 dozen journalists that check that stuff. And it's an interesting company. They make their money it's a licensing. So if you have the video of the real Tahrir Square and they verify it, they will represent you and sell it to CNN. But even if you put it up on YouTube and nobody's making any money, they will tell people whether it's true or not. And it's, News Corp bought the business, and it's a good thing,
Well, for the time being, although there have to be some internal battles between Fox News and Storyfall.
Well, Fox News is no longer part of News Corp. Fox News is part of 21st Century Fox, right? Fox News is not in the news organization. Wall Street Journal and the New York Post and some Australian shit is in News Corp. But
you really think anybody there can tell? Whatever. We
will see.
Well, by the way, bravo, Storyfall. Keep up the good work. Fight the good fight. And they're based in Ireland, so if
they're based in Ireland and in the News Corp building. And they did something interesting in the last week or so. They've some other people are doing this too. They put up a little Chrome extension. So if you're in a newsroom, you go and you see a YouTube clip, it'll put a little green or red dot to say whether it's been verified by Storyful or not, to make it easier. But
just to be clear, that's different than the First Draft News Chrome extension, right?
It is trying to get the same thing. So the first Draft is this organization that's sponsored by a bunch of journalistic organizations to do good and useful things. And they took the work of, I think, a professor who basically did a fact-checking 101 checklist that they printed on cardstock and gave to people that said, here's how you validate, is this video by the people it says it's from, is it where it says it is? And they put that checklist into an interactive thing. So you're sitting in the newsroom and you don't have to pull out a piece of cardboard, very low tech in this world, and you can do it right in your browser, and then you can see how other people answered the same quiz and whether they think it's a real video or not. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's part of the sense that, we all have to really work to understand what's real. And to some degree we can work together. But whether the Breitbart White House people will come out with an alternative plug-in that, validates things based on Kellyanne Conway's facts, I wouldn't be surprised.
So the news checklist at some level is very obvious. And then on the other hand, actually kind of like where we are, right? So here they're saying, are you looking at photo check? Are you looking at the original version? Do you know who captured the photo? Do you know where the photo was captured? Do you know when the photo was captured? I mean, I'm a little ashamed that, isn't that journalism 101? I mean,
look, you remember the article in the New Yorker that turned into the book about checklists, right? So it turns out if you tell even very good surgeons, have you washed your hands? Have you written down on a piece of paper, are you taking out the right or the left kidney?
Yeah.
Error rates go down when someone has to walk through all that stuff. So it's not, it doesn't answer this big question necessarily, which is what happens when the President of the United States stands on a podium and says, the moon is made of green cheese, and, all the moon boxes in the Smithsonian.
So perfect example. He goes to the CIA and he says, the media is trying to pit us against each other, but I love you. And first of all, I can think of a lot of things I would say about the CIA, but I'm not sure they want to be loved. And I'm not sure you can love a room of three, just as a piece of fact. I don't know if you can love a room of 300 people. You can say, I respect you. You can say, I admire your work. But I love you from the guy who said they were Nazi Germany 10 days ago? It's if anything, what's striking about how quickly things have gone sideways is, you'd think he would have gotten good coaching and would have been reading off a teleprompter and would have been at least play acting presidential a little bit, but he seems to be going the other direction.
I mean, this is no more or no less than the Emperor's New Clothes, right? And you're Kellyanne Conroy, you're Reince Priebus, and you realize this act is what got us here, right? So if you want to be in power, you have to be talking about the beautiful fabric of the non-existent suit, because you sort of are convincing yourself it worked.
Yeah. Now, not to be catty, but since we seem to be going down this way, I'll just go a little further. I mean, Kellyanne Conway on the morning news show this morning looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Like, the thing you have to remember about when people do the morning news show is they've had at least half an hour, 45 minutes of pretty serious hair and makeup. So when they look shitty on those shows, you can only imagine what they look like when they rolled out of bed in the morning before, a spatula full of cover-up was put over those dark circles. Like, that's the best they could do to hide her, I want to think, embarrassment, exhaustion, but maybe not. Maybe it's...
I don't know. I hope she writes a tell-all book, but it's some...
So I'll only say one more thing, and then we'll go on to some other things in Netflix. But I was at the New York-based Women's March yesterday for a number of hours, and I have to tell you, there were a couple of things that were really interesting about being there. The vibe was incredibly warm. There was no anger. There was no, boiling under, this crowd's going to go nuts, they're going to break windows. It was like real people, lots of older people, lots of senior citizens, lots of children. It was safe. It was communal. It felt it was very nice. Very
Slowly, quietly suggesting that the patriarchy be disentangled and demolished, and a new, better order will take over.
All right. So in part of this larger, the media waking up from its slumber and starting to fact check and do its job. So the Washington Post announced that it is doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down, whatever the hell it's doing, and starting to build a major video team.
Here's the thing about that, right? I like 3/4 of what the Bezos area Washington Post is doing. I like it a lot. But the Washington Post has zigged and zagged around video so much, and so have the newspapers, and I just don't think that any of the newspapers have a clue of what they want to do with video other than earn money on TV commercials. They don't have a vision for a video news product that makes any sense, and they haven't. The Post tried a couple of really creative things and then blew them up. And so hiring 30 people is not solving the problem that needs to be solved.
Well, all right. I'm willing to put it in the good news category just because I'm
sure.
I'm
creative. I mean, they've hired good people. They're, but it's, I think that the Bezos Amazon empire is more likely to come up with a good video news product in Audible or in Amazon Prime than out of the Washington Post. But Audible is doing very interesting things around podcasts. But anyway.
All right, so moving on, Netflix announced its Q4 numbers. I think that had we done a guess last week and you'd asked me to bet, I would have said flat. I would have said doing okay, but they kind of blew the doors off everything.
And they make their own predictions a quarter out, and they blew past their predictions. So they're up 7 million total subscriptions. That's 2 million net adds in the U.S., which is pretty damn mature. So they're up to 48 million subscriptions. That's basically half of the American households. And just as an asterisk on that, you may remember 2 years ago they raised the price from $8 to $10 a month, but they grandfathered you in for 2 years. That grandfather came off this quarter. A bunch of people quit, discovered they couldn't live without Netflix, and resubscribed. So
just out of curiosity, let me just finish the numbers.
5 million new subscribers overseas, so they're up to 41 million in the rest of the world. It's not a lot, and there's a lot of growth there. Anyway, keep going.
So what's the thing about Netflix that you can't do without? What's the one show?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I still have it more for the family. I mean, my younger daughter, who really wants to be Frank Underwood when she grows up, has discovered House of Cards and is binge watching like the entire 4 or 5 years of it. I don't have a show right now that I'm addicted to. Do you?
No, I mean, I'm watching. There's a time traveler show that I like. Well, no, that's not fair. We talked about it last week. I mean, I am midway through the second season of Man in a High Castle, which I just find extraordinary and prescient and brilliant and frightening. And
wasn't it Amazon? No.
Yeah. Fair enough. Amazon. I'm confusing it with Netflix. My bad. No, exactly correct, because it's Bezos. Netflix. Waiting for House of Cards, watching the time traveler show, but no, nothing that's appointment viewing for me.
The interesting thing is, $10 a month direct is an amount of money that is not cheap. This is a company that earns $8 billion a year from the streaming service, but it's cheap enough compared to cable that they can people aren't constantly leaving it, and but they're growing enough, right? So their content budget, which was 2 years ago was $3 billion a year. Last year was $5 billion. This year's is going to be $6 billion. More than half of that now is original rather than licensing stuff from studios, although they paid Disney a shitload. They have a very fine business, except for this one little fact. If you look at the very bottom of Reed's shareholder letter, you have this measure called free cash flow. That's the sort of thing that like a household will look at. How much money do you have in the bank? And they had, I think it was almost $2 billion less in the bank at the end of the year than they did at the beginning of the year, because they're spending so much money on content, more than they're taking in. If you assume that you'll make money over time, that's okay, but they're spending a lot of money and they're borrowing it to do it.
By the way, now that I'm reading his letter again, I did like the OA. Mm-hmm. I was sorry when it ended.
He's boasting about, they have a series in Portuguese in Brazil called 3%, post-apocalyptic thriller, of course, that not only is doing well all Latin America, it is the first show dubbed from Portuguese into English that has become successful in North America. So they're importing things from Portugal that aren't telenovelas, and successful with it. So there's an interesting two-way cultural flow.
I just want to say, as the co-host of this podcast, I'm so impressed that you read to page 9 of his shareholder letter to find the free cash flow line, which I just like well done, Mr. Journalist. For reading the fine print.
Set of skills, but reading earnings releases is one I taught myself. I got to the New York Times from a magazine where I never had to do it, and suddenly I had to read Citibank's earnings reports in an era where people were saying they weren't going to make it, and I had to find the hidden number on, the 17 pages into a long fax. So I taught myself a couple things. What has gotten me? Let's me be the numbers geek in a podcast. That's what it gets me.
So let's play this out. Do you think there's Reed sitting down and saying to the guys like, hey, this extra $2 billion in cash that we had that we don't have anymore, like we're a little like this is a little gut wrenching. Or is he just all in?
Well, there's, I think that, you know, they're getting a lot less heat than Amazon. I mean, Amazon, if you remember, in its first big build-up, like around the year 2000, Barron's did a big cover story called Amazon.bomb, because they had borrowed $2 billion to build all their first set of big automated warehouses. And they were going on about how, I mean, I sat down with their CFO about how it all made sense if you looked at it right. But Netflix is somehow, everybody, you know, Wall Street loves them. They do the accounting, so they are making a teeny weeny bit of money, right? There's a net profit because presumably they amortize, meaning they delay taking the expense from all that content over a really long period of time. So it looks like they're making money, even though their bank account is negative. But, you know, you've got to ask, you know, what would happen if, right? So Reed is no dummy. So, you know, there's a question. Do you go $2 billion in the hole, $3 billion in the hole, $1 billion in the hole? Those are real questions, right?
Well, and you're competing with Amazon, which is selling diapers and dog food. So, you know, presumably on a dollar for dollar basis, you don't want to be in a business where you're trying to outspend Amazon, because, you know, they've got an entirely different business model.
And you're competing with everybody, right? So you're competing seriously with AT&T, right? And they have, you know, talk about free cash flow, the money that spins off of their cell phone business, you know, $2 billion comes in every week or two, right? So you're competing. I mean, he lists them all, right? I mean, there's no shortage of competition, but so you could ask, you know, would anybody be surprised if with more competition and a saturation of the U.S., if it was like what you said it was, if his growth was flat, if he tops out at 50 billion or 50 million of the 100 million U.S. households, that's a good business. But even if the growth stopped, but it's not yet.
So there's one more. So which brings us to this HBO binge first conversation that you dug up. Like, I mean,
So you know, he's talking about. So he runs in this letter, and his letters are always interesting. He's pointing out, sort of in this a little bit gratuitous "I told you so" sort of way, how binge watching is rolling through the world, and how the BBC, for the first time, is now saying it will let people who are watching their streaming service called the iPlayer watch the whole series when it first comes out and not have to wait until each episode shows up on the TV network. And he's saying,
and Reed's saying that he predicts that HBO can't avoid that much longer.
And HBO comes back through Peter Kafka and says, we can do it if we want to, and we don't want to because we think that we get better promotion from doing it this way. And I don't have a strong opinion. You know, marketing is an art, not a science. And if you said to me, we think that having each episode of Game of Thrones come out on a particular day so everyone has to talk about it at the office works for us, that doesn't sound ridiculous, does it? I mean,
you may not remember this, but when the first season of House of Cards came out, I wrote what turned out to be a fairly controversial piece for Forbes, in which I said that I thought Reed made a mistake by letting people binge watch the show, and he was losing water cooler, and I had this whole argument that I made with great care, and I just got the shit kicked out of me. And
in retrospect, do you think that you were right, and that Reed has left some money on the table?
Well, I ended up doing something I've never done in my writing career before or since, and I retracted it.
Huh.
And what I said after I was called on the carpet by the commenters was, I watched the first episode on an airplane, I watched the second episode in a hotel room, I watched the third episode with my wife, I watched the fourth episode on a phone. Like, once I actually thought about how I was consuming House of Cards, I was consuming exactly the way I was criticizing Reed for distributing it, which was letting people have it when they want it, where they want it, how they want it. And I think I was wrong. I think he was prescient to see that the technology allowed it to happen. It was going to happen. Someone was going to do it, and he just pushed the button first.
I also think that there is just a marketing advantage to being different, right? The idea that if, brand X is this way, if you can be a different way that is, even if it's no better or no worse, right? So if HBO stands for once a week, Netflix can stand for all at once. And it might make sense for HBO to stay being once a week just because that's what they're known for. And
and copying, Netflix would be embarrassing.
For 30 seconds.
I think Reed actually, it was a smart play to throw that out there. Anyway, so we have time for 2 more quick stories.
Yeah.
This one, as you point out, is a little bit late because the actual event happened before the inauguration, but I still think it deserves a moment of our time. And that is the CEO of AT&T groveling his way over to Trump Tower, which, by the way, for the purposes of this podcast, I'm going to rename Trump Castle.
Okay.
Essentially to say, please, sir, don't stop my M&A strategy. And what can I do for you, Mr. Trump? I don't know. I mean, I think
there are so many open questions about which of the many things that got tweeted out in the campaign they're going to feel like they have to pay attention to, and how much of the populist, how does the populist rhetoric from the top intersect with the crony capitalist nature of the cabinet with the highest IQ in history.
It sure does seem like the FCC is, under the new rumored chairman, likely to be pretty anti-net neutrality, kind of out of the gate.
I mean, there were some of the proposals that came out of the transition were to eliminate the FCC's involvement in mergers at all and just let the normal merger review for other kinds of companies, which are split oddly between the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission, which are both more, well, the FTC is lame and the Justice Department is political.
All right. So last but not least, we would be remiss with just 2 minutes left to not say something about Nancy Grace. What exactly is she up to? She's building her own Nancy Grace channel?
All right. This is actually an idea that has been kicking around people for a while. The concept of taking celebrities and making them into something. And in fact, the people behind this are the people who were behind the Glenn Beck streaming service, which is probably the most successful of this ilk, right? They have a couple.
I'm sorry, which people are this?
Joel Cheatwood is the main guy.
Yeah.
And something happened with Glenn Beck, and everybody quit over the last year. And he had some very smart people there. I don't know Joel Cheatwood, but I know people who worked with him, and he highly regarded, and there's a whole team, and they started a company that isn't called or it might be Red Sea Ventures or something very much like that. But it's and they are, the idea is, if you have the next Rush Limbaugh or the next personality, why should they get a TV contract and let Fox or CNN make all the money, or the radio, and just build a subscription-based streaming service? So
are people, last final question, oh, great oracle of wisdom and knowledge. Are people really going to pay for Nancy Grace? Like,
she's going to be fighting crime, solving crimes.
Well, All in favor of fighting crime say aye. I'm in favor, but I don't know that I'll pay for Nancy Reyes. We are out
You
of
don't
time.
think that we're going to get like 12 people to pay our 50 cents a year subscription fee that I've been working up?
We're out of time. I wish I could debate this with you, but we will be back next week with another edition of Hacking TV. Until then, have a good week and hack on.
Keep on hacking.
Keep on hacking.